Hello and welcome to question and answer number 5,365, which is kind of what it seems like to me now because it's up to 65 already, which is just amazing to me. Anyway, I am your host, Paññobhāsa, Mr. Understanding Shine, translated literally into English. And this is my beverage. And this is my emergency backup beverage, just in case the first beverage is not sufficient. And we got like the standard medium length number of questions here to answer. And I'm feeling much better than I was the last few weeks when I contracted some disease and was just sort of, I don't know, in a state of contraction and withdrawal pretty much. Happened a lot as a monk too, so it's not like any kind of violent reaction against being a layperson. It was just like sometimes you just kind of, it's like my consciousness expands and contracts like the Buddhist cosmos, and in contracted phases, sometimes I'm like a turtle that just kind of pulls in its legs and its head and its tail and just kind of withdraws. I was in a state along those lines for a few weeks, and then getting sick didn't help. But I'm feeling better. I just have like the standard mild hangover on Saturday. Not a hangover from booze, but a hangover from just work and sleep deprivation throughout most of the week. And then usually Sunday I feel kind of normal, and then it's reset again. It's part of getting older, I suppose. It's one thing that I've noticed about getting older is it's like your life force, your vitality is reduced. So you can act just as young. I can work harder than the young guys at work and so forth, but it just takes more out of you to keep it going. But enough of that. I think I'm going to start answering questions now because that is the purpose of this video. Me sitting here answering questions. And the first question is from Fred. And Fred says, what in the citta has preferences? And the citta here is just the Pali word, usually translated as mind. And it really, in Buddhism, it mainly refers to just mental processes in general. In a more technical sense, it can mean consciousness. But here, I assume it just means mental processes in general. And what in the citta has preferences, it'd be mainly volition or cetana, although there would have to be perception or sanya inextricably involved in that. So it'd be will and representation using Schopenhauer's terminology, or at least the translator of Schopenhauer's terminology. So it'd be mainly volition. The actual choosing would be an act of volition, but you can't choose without something that you perceive to choose. So volition and perception are just, in a way, they're just two aspects of the same process. So I'll just move on to Fred's next question here. What's your insights on kleshas? Some monks almost give them personality traits. Are they just the hindrances? Well, kleshas is like the Sanskrit version of the Pali word kilesa, which is usually translated as defilement. So anything that is unwholesome, impure, something that is not helping you to become enlightened, but is actually preventing you from becoming enlightened would qualify as a kilesa. And he says here, some monks almost give them personality traits, but some personality traits can be kilesas. I mean, if you've got greedy personality traits or hostile personality traits or so forth, then those would qualify as kilesas because they're helping you to stay unenlightened. So they're not just the hindrances, because the hindrances are this list of 5, and kilesas are more general than that. Just anything that is a part of your personality that is unenlightened would qualify as a kilesa. Anything that helps you to remain unenlightened. And so I guess I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from the Dark Knight, spelled Knight. So it's from Batman, apparently. And the Dark Knight says, why do you refer to yourself as Paññobhāsa since you are no longer a monk? Well, I've been named Paññobhāsa for literally half my lifetime. I assume I've earned the name. And I mean, I don't call myself Paññobhāsa Bhikkhu anymore because I'm not a bhikkhu. But the name Paññobhāsa, I mean, it's like a name. It's like a nickname or something. And I mean, it's not that having a Pali name necessarily means that you're a monk. Like in the Buddha's time, people weren't given a new name at their ordination. They just had like a Pali or, a language similar to Pali. I mean, their name would be part of that. And that's just what they'd be called. Like Sariputta just means son of Sari. And names like Kassapa and I think Moggallana, I mean, those are just family names. Like Gotama was also like a family or clan name. So having a Pali name doesn't necessarily imply that you're a monk. And people who aren't monks can have Pali nicknames. I mean, there's nothing against any rule for that. So, since I've been called Paññobhāsa for most of my adult life, and since possibly most people who call me by a name nowadays still call me that, or Pañño, that I don't really see any great need to stop calling myself that. I mean, it's just a name. I really don't care much about names. I go by at least 3 different names. My first name, my middle name, and my Pali name. So it's not a big deal for me. I don't really identify with it. It's just a matter of, I don't know, convenience or habit or whatever. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Trust Wet Farts. And Trust Wet Farts says, do you see people's eyes glowing? And he asked me this question before, I'm pretty sure, and I just kind of didn't answer it. I don't answer 100% of all questions. And I don't know, I just seemed like it wasn't really an earnest question or something, but he asked it again, so I guess I was mistaken, and he really does want to know the answer to this. And the reason why he asks me if I see people's eyes glowing is because sometimes, like on my avatars or on some of my video thumbnails, I'll have like the glowing eyes. Or once or twice, my dog Genghis also has had glowing eyes. And so he wants to know if I really see people that way. And the answer is no, I do not see people that way. I got the idea originally from memes. There's like the memes of the red eyes, like the laser beam eyes. I don't know. I just kind of like that idea, so I went with it. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Sakyaputta, son of the Sakya. And Sakyaputta says, I suppose that being a monk for such a long time caused you to be very cautious and selective in your interactions with other people, maybe even reluctant to allow many new relationships to prosper and deepen, given the fact that there are probably not many kalyanamitas around to supply at least in day-to-day lay settings. In supply, at least in day-to-day settings. Do you feel that's the case for you? If it is, how do you deal with this? Do you have any strategies to share as to not coming across so obviously uninterested and even sometimes as a blunt, insensitive a-hole to other people? Well, yeah, when I was a monk, especially when I was like a cave-dwelling recluse, I really did avoid people a lot of the time. People would come to visit me. I'd just stay hiding in my cave, not wanting to come out and meet with them. I mean, as somebody I didn't know, I had no interest in meeting these people. Sometimes I'd even like pee into a container just so I wouldn't have to go outside to go to the bathroom and just wait until they went away. And also as a monk, a lot of the time, I would just see people as like stimuli. Somebody standing in front of you, it might as well just be the image of somebody standing in front of you on like a video screen. I mean, it was hard to really just sort of have empathy with other people. Because, I mean, a monk is supposed to just like deconstruct everything into just like sensory data. And I was a little too good at that at times, I guess. And so really, I mean, people would just be like stimuli. I mean, I might as well just be dreaming them. But on the other hand, my years as a monk caused me to have more compassion, because just trying to be a perfected saint as hard as you can for years, and still, I mean, it doesn't happen the way it's supposed to happen. It doesn't happen the way you want it to happen, and you're just stuck being human. So that I have a lot more compassion for messed up people now, because I mean, they really don't have much chance or opportunity to improve themselves significantly. Even, and I mean, especially considering that people who are trying full time to improve themselves significantly still, as a general rule, tend to fail spectacularly. So I do, I mean, it's on the one hand, I don't really get attached to people. It's just very rare for me to invite somebody over or just want to hang out with somebody other than my sweetheart. Um, it's just, and to that extent, I mean, I'm friendly, I'm personable, people like me, but at the same time, I'm kind of detached, and that might bother them a little bit, but at least I engage. I have like a certain amount of empathy with them. There's a rapport, sort of um, like a meeting of the minds to some degree. I can sort of relate. I can sort of pick up on their vibe, and we can connect at a slightly deeper level than most people do in some cases. But at the same time, I don't really have any attachment to that. And as I said, I do have a certain amount of sympathy for people. I have more compassion and like Christian charity towards the average person now than I did as a human race hating young man. And I really did just pretty much despise the human race when I was younger. So how do I deal with this? I mean, that's essentially the case with me. It's not as extreme as the Sakyaputta here is laying it out for himself, maybe. But how do I deal with this? Do I have any strategies? Really, I mean, if you're just open to another person, I mean, you're not just closed off against them, then I mean, there's going to be a certain amount of like empathy or something going back and forth, a certain connection, and just be friendly and polite. I mean, you realize that if you're like rude to somebody, if you hurt somebody's feelings, I mean, it's like coming back to you. It's sort of like an us when you're interacting with somebody. There's like this entity that is an us that is involved, and hurting others just really hurts yourself. So, I mean, you just kind of feel into that, and you're just friendly and polite, and you know, crack jokes and make people laugh, and they like you, and I mean, you like them too, really. I mean, you're not attached. I mean, you don't want to invite them over for dinner or anything, but still, it's like be not so much in your head, not be just sort of closed off so that people are nothing more than stimuli. Like I was saying when I was a monk, like especially earlier on as a monk. Um, yeah, I guess just have some compassion and try not to be like completely in your head. Try to be open. Accept that this is another me. Really, I mean, we all call ourselves by the same name, me, right? It's all just manifestations of the same consciousness. So just do your best. And if people still think you're an asshole, which, I mean, some people think I'm an asshole, I assume, especially on the internet, especially like leftist Buddhists. I mean, they just think I'm like this evil Nazi or something. Then, I mean, it's just the way it is. So, oh well. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from White Ash Piper. And White Ash Piper says, Dave, you don't feel that World War III is in our midst? Seems things are getting pretty warm in the old town these days. Well, World War III it's been in our midst since before I was born. It's like the Cold War. You had like high military officials and state ministers and so forth saying that nuclear war with Russia is just inevitable. We just don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. It's got to happen. There's since more than 2,000 years, the world has been coming to an end. I mean, you got on the internet, you can look at lists of the world coming to an end. These theories, these prophecies that just didn't pan out. I mean, 2012 was supposed to be the end. The Mayan calendar and all that. There was the guy who was saying the rapture was going to happen in 2011 or something like that. He was the same guy that was saying that the world was going to end in 1998. I knew an Australian monk who was actually ordering pamphlets and stuff, reading about how the world was going to end in 1998. In the New Testament, I think it's the first epistle of John, he says, this is the final hour, almost 2,000 years ago. And the Middle East has always been a war zone. I mean, Jews and Arabs, Jews and Muslims have been fighting since as long as there have been Jews and Muslims. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it could be that World War III is in our midst, but potentially it could have happened at any moment during my entire life. So I'm really not that concerned about it. So I'll just move on to White Ash Piper's next question, who says, also, have you considered other platforms such as Odyssey or Rumble? So far, they're free speech forwards. Yeah, I'm just kind of lazy and just going through the trouble of just getting started on Rumble or whatever. I think I do have an account. I think my sweetheart set up an account for me on Rumble, but for some reason I just don't upload my videos onto Rumble yet, but I suppose I should. Rumble sounds pretty good. And I think it's more progressive, so to speak, not in the political sense, but in the sense of like improving upon itself and just continuing to move forwards and get better and better, more so than, say, BitChute, which I do upload onto BitChute, and I like the platform, but still, it has issues that there's sort of like obstacles to it really taking off. So, but YouTube, YouTube is problematic. You got to admit. They're censorious, and they take a certain political position, and anyone who does not adopt that political position is got a target on them, essentially. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Hurdy-Gurdy Man. And Hurdy-Gurdy Man says, weeks ago I had a distressing psychedelic experience that completely broke apart any delusions I had about being able to understand the existence by my own mental concepts. Reality shown itself to me as an indifferent and absolutely incomprehensible Lovecraftian horror. Any philosophical idea of mine turned out to be nothing more than incoherent, fragmented nonsense. Now I'm in a state where I feel as if I have little footing in conventional reality. I go through the motions of everyday life. I work towards goals I know on an intellectual level I'm supposed to reach, but still everything just seems to lack any inherent meaning. Is this a skillful or unskillful mental state? Well, whether it's skillful or unskillful depends on your attitude with regard to it. Like the Lovecraftian horror part, horror is generally an unskillful mental state. It can be sort of a left-handed skillful means towards something better after the horror subsides. The horror can just like jolt you into a better state, just getting away from the horror, something like that. But it seems like maybe the Lovecraftian horror was just during the psychedelic experience, which may have been drug-induced. And you should take that into consideration too, that just because you have a psychedelic experience doesn't necessarily mean that it's less delusional than the ordinary waking state of consciousness. A lot of mentally ill people have these really intense, more or less psychedelic experiences that, they're just stuck in them and they don't get enlightened. But so long as, it seems like one of the main themes of this state is just that nothing seems to have any essence. Nothing really makes any inherent sense. And if you read, let's see, the the sutta on the uptaken stick, the Atadanda Sutta of the Sutta Nipata, of the Atthakavagga of Sutta Nipata, the Buddha is talking about his mental states before he became enlightened. And it reminds me of this. He's saying that, there was no safe haven anywhere. There's no solid footing anywhere. Everything seemed to be without essence, without purpose, without meaning. And then it just sort of caused a kind of samvega, or spiritual urgency and alarm, that motivated him to practice diligently, and he became the Buddha subsequently. So it must have helped in his case. So is this a skillful or unskillful mental state? It depends on what you do with it. I mean, if it helps you to detach from samsaric reality, I mean, if it helps you, if it inspires you to practice, to be more meditative and less stuck in samsara, then it's a good thing. But if you just stay kind of lost in this state, I mean, the distress you experience would be unskillful. So it depends on what you do with it. And overall, it does seem like it could be, it could be an open door. It could potentially be very beneficial to you in the long run. I think taking psychedelic drugs has helped a lot of people. Ram Dass being a famous example of that. But it depends on the individual person and what they do with the strange, disorienting mental states. Whether it helps them or they just get stuck in this lostness. So I think I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Crave Minerals. And Crave Minerals says, could you elaborate on why you are expressing doubts about whether a fully enlightened being can exist in a samsaric context? Well, a fully enlightened being is a person who is aware of ultimate reality. And ultimate reality is not samsaric. And so from a samsaric context, this person doesn't really know ultimate reality, because ultimate reality is just off the scale. Samsara, nothing samsaric can touch it. And so nirvana and samsara, I mean, in a way, they're not mutually exclusive. Like samsara is the form and nirvana is the essence at a metaphysical level. But at the ethical level, nirvana or enlightenment is just the realization of this ultimate reality. And when you're realizing something that is completely off the scale, that is not in samsara, within the context of samsara, I mean, it's just meaningless. So I used to say, sometimes I still say, I mean, just kind of as a thought experiment, that Satan, assuming that there really is a Satan or a devil, I mean, deep down, he'd have to be an atheist, because there's nothing beyond samsara to a thoroughly samsaric, unenlightened, unwise being. So, I mean, that's essentially it. Enlightenment is just off the scale of samsara, and so samsara can't touch it. And so it would have really no meaning in a samsaric context. And if you give it samsaric meaning, then you've already missed the boat, because that's not it. That's not what it is. So it's fairly straightforward, I think, that nirvana is not on the list of the 31 planes of existence. It's just completely off the scale. And so enlightenment, likewise, by the same token, would be off the scale, because enlightenment is the realization of nirvana. So, it's sort of like trying to understand the Kantian thing in itself in terms of the Kantian thing as it seems, which, I mean, it's just futile. It's never going to happen. It's never going to come close to working. So I guess I should might as well move on to the next question here. This is from Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana. And Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana says, hypothetically, someone makes a system where a suspect is kept in a room for interrogation. The person asking questions doesn't get the answers he wants. He informs a higher up, The higher up follows a procedure to tell someone else who pushes a button for the suspect to get tortured by a machine. No one in this chain of command knows that what they do is what is going to lead to torture, including the button pusher. The entire thing was made via collaboration of a corporation who doesn't ever get involved in actually torturing someone, so they have no volition to kill, just putting and planning machinery together as an engineering project. The government who buys it knows what it does, but doesn't get involved in any torturing, but rather hires people to follow certain steps without them knowing this will lead to torture. Is this a sensible way to make a Buddhist method of torture? Would you able to create a mass death camps in this way without anyone having any negative karma in the process, hypothetically speaking, of course? Well, I mean, obviously the people at the top know what they're doing. And even this corporation that's engineering torturing devices, I mean, it's sort of like the physicists who made the first nuclear bombs. You know, it's like they knew what they were making. They knew that people were going to get vaporized and irradiated from what they were inventing. But they went ahead and did it anyway for the sake of the greater good or whatever. Or also, it kind of reminds me of Vonnegut novel, Kurt Vonnegut, Cat's Cradle, where there's this chemist who invents ice 9, which is a kind of ice crystal that crystallizes at room temperature. And I mean, he doesn't care that it can destroy life on Earth. He's just kind of autistic and just purely interested in the scientific angle of, can this be done? Can I do this? And then it winds up in, pretty much everybody in the world dying because like this crystal of ice 9 falls into the ocean and the entire ocean freezes solid. And so, I mean, he's making karma. He's making these decisions. He knows that it's going to hurt people. I mean, he knows that it can hurt people. He just doesn't care. And it's even more the case with regard to the government setting up this system and like the corporation that's designing the system. Even if the actual grunts that are running the thing don't even know what they're doing. I mean, still, you can't have like a concentration camp without somebody knowing that they're running a concentration camp. You got to have somebody guarding the place or whatever. So yeah, it would be, you could theoretically say that, most of the people involved wouldn't know what they were doing. But still, I mean, there were people who would know. And even like sensitive people would probably get a feeling that what they were doing just wasn't quite right somehow. And then they just go ahead and do it anyway. And then they're making karma. So, yeah, I don't think there is really a Buddhist method of like institutional torture of like criminals or whatever. I just don't think that's going to happen. You're just going to have people that are just willing to take the karmic hit, and there's always going to be people willing to do that. Just assuming that for some reason a Buddhist government sees it as expedient to torture people. Like for example, you got the terrorist who's got the bomb planted in an inhabited area. He's the only person who knows where it is. You've got the terrorist in custody. He's not talking. So you got to find out where the bomb is before it blows up. So, I mean, that is like an ethics problem, sort of like the trolley car problems. It's like, is it worthwhile? Is it like morally justifiable to torture this one terrorist in order to prevent 10,000 people from blowing up? So it's probably better just to have someone willingly take the hit than go through all the trouble of all this double-blind processes that really isn't going to work in the long run, because obviously there's still going to be people who know what's going on and are calling the shots. So I'll just move on to CO Vakshin Sipad Zidana's next question, which is, I was going through the various parts of G.C. Pandey's book on the studies on the origins of Buddhism. However, the book is from the 1950s, and there were many suttas in there that the author put in the unknown category of whether they are early texts or late texts. Is there any updates on these unknown suttas and where they would belong? I want to be able to make a comprehensive reading of the early texts and be able to differentiate from later ones. Also, you have talked about how some of the suttas from the Sutta Nipata are the oldest. Do you know if there are any databases of anyone trying to give an order or range of ordering of sutta ages to this level of detail? Well, I don't think there's any way of just scientifically quantifying. I mean, you can have certain assumptions. Certain words are later, certain terms are earlier, certain trends like devotionalism and like the fairy tale narratives and just stock phrases, that kind of thing would be indicative of later material. Just the very elaborate question and answer suttas would be indicative of later material that's getting towards commentarial stuff and then Abhidhamma and so forth. But there's no way of knowing for sure. So it's just different people will have different intuitions, different insights, different theories that they're working with. And G.C. Pandey was wiser and understood Dhamma better than the average Buddhistic studies scholar. He understood Dhamma better than, say, Richard Gombrich. And Richard Gombrich wrote a book, How Buddhism Began, The Conditioned Genesis of the Early Teachings. And it's not as good of a book as Pandey's book, even though it was written a few decades later, simply because this kind of thing, it relies more on the wisdom of the person who's investigating it and their understanding of Dhamma at a deep level, not just an intellectual, like a scholastic level, but deep down they get it. I think, regardless of whether it was written in the 1950s or the 1850s or whatever, that something written by a person like that will be better than just following a Buddhistic studies trend in academia. You just got to look around, and if it resonates, it just rings true, then you can follow that. If their arguments make a lot of sense and so forth. But I don't think there's no way that they're going to be just crystallizing down the Pali Tipitaka to get with certainty the oldest text, because it just doesn't work that way. It's all going to be educated guesses. So, you can just go through some of the academic literature, filter out all the, why Buddhism is pro homosexuality and all this like gender studies and like grievance studies stuff that's been being injected into Buddhistic studies over the past few decades, especially the past one decade. And I assume there's still some really valid valid scholarship going on, like studies of the Sutta Nipata and so forth. Yeah, it's out there. I can't really think of any names offhand, but it's out there. But it's not going to be like 100% certain. It's not just going to be empirical facts. These are older, these are later, because you can have like later texts that mimic older texts. For example, you can have older texts that just have like later stuff injected into them, that kind of thing. So there's always going to be a certain amount of ambiguity. So I guess I'll just move on to Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana's next question, which is, in your videos of begging in Burmese villages, the women covered their head. However, Vinaya rules say you can't teach Dhamma if someone's head is covered. In some traditions, especially Japanese, many nuns also covered their heads, even though it's shaved, especially older ladies. Can you explain the significance of covering your head and taking head coverings off in these various traditions and cultures, and why this practice varies so much? I know it was common practice among women in Central Asia and the Middle East before Islam even in the middle country where the Buddha taught. The Jain tradition has nuns covering their heads as well, but Vinaya makes it seem disrespectful to cover your head, so it's hard to know exactly where and why there are so many different customs for this seemingly innocuous practice in India and beyond. Well, it's not disrespectful to cover your head even in ancient Indian culture, it's disrespectful to cover your head when you're approaching a teacher or a venerable person, or when you're learning Dhamma. You're supposed to some degree, humble yourself, to show honor to the teacher or to the Dhamma. And so, I mean, just covering your head is not disrespectful of anything. It's just you should uncover your head. I think the Bible or early Christianity also had women were supposed to. I guess women were supposed to cover their head when they went to church. But the thing about the videos about me going for alms round in Burma is those videos were taken in January, which was like the coldest time of year in Burma, as well as in the temperate zone of the northern hemisphere. And so they were just covering their head with a towel or something just to keep their head warm. So it wasn't, and I wasn't teaching Dhamma to them, and so there's no rule at all against that. And most of the year they don't cover their head because it's usually blazing hot in central Burma instead of relatively cool. Cool enough that your breath vaporizes. You can see your breath. It doesn't get that cool very often in Burma, but in January, it does. And also, I found that in central Burma, if the temperature gets below about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, people start layering up. They'll be wearing quilted jackets and so forth. So, yeah, in this case, it was just they were staying warm because it was wintertime. And a lot of these traditions of whether you should cover your head or uncover your head and so forth, it's just arbitrary. It's just cultural stuff. So, yeah, it's like the priests, ancient Roman priests, at least the high priests, were supposed to cover their head with their toga or something when they would be doing the rituals and so forth. But whether you cover your head or uncover it, I really don't think the higher beings really care. So it's just mainly a cultural thing. And if the culture says it's disrespectful to cover your head, then you uncover your head when, addressing a teacher or listening to a sermon or something. And vice versa, if the culture says the opposite. So I don't know how thoroughly I answered that question, but I'm just going to move on to Siovaksh and Sipat Zidana's next question, which is, do you ever have dreams of being back in the caves and thinking you going back to America and being a layperson was all just your imagination and you need to go back to practicing? Well, no, I don't ever have dreams like that. I mean, I still have a few monk dreams, but I was a monk for probably 10 years before I was a monk in most of my dreams, even when I had been a monk for 10 years. And then sometimes you'd have hybrid dreams where you're just hanging out with your buddies from college or something, and somebody says, "Hey, let's go to McDonald's." And I'd say, "Okay, I got to wrap up first." And then, I'd be a monk and have to like cover both shoulders before we went to McDonald's. I had one memorable dream where I was a monk at the time when I had the dream, and I was stealing car stereos. There was some kind of festival or something going on in a park, and there was all these parked cars, and I was just going through the cars just stealing stuff. And then I just wake up and I think, I'm Parajika, and I'm thinking I can put it all back, but it's already too late because you've already taken it, so you're already excommunicated. And then finally you just realize, oh, it's just a dream. Okay, I'm fine. I've had Parajika dreams before, like sex dreams, that kind of thing, where, man, I just excommunicated myself, and then I realized, oh wait, it's just a dream. I remember one time I was still in the dream. It was close to a lucid dream where I'm eating dinner or something, which is against the rules for a monk. And then I think, oh, this is against the rules. I can't be doing this. And then I had a lucid enough moment that then I realized, oh, this is just a dream. I can just still keep eating this. So I did. And there's a dog snoring behind me right now. Okay, so yeah, I still have dreams of being a monk, but very rarely, maybe once every few months. And none of it is including everything being my imagination. And I'm still a monk and didn't really go back to America. I mean, I'm not aware of believing that I went back to America and then thinking that that didn't happen. And when I was a kid, my parents got divorced when I was 9, and there was a few years afterwards where have these like fantasies where I just wake up one day and I'd still be 9 before they got divorced and everything would be back the way it was again. But nothing like that has happened to me with regard to disrobing that I can think of, that I can remember. So I'll just move on to the next question from Siovach and Sipad Zidana after taking a sip of my beverage. And this question is, Bhikkhu Bodhi wrote a paper on non-duality in Buddhist teachings. Can you please do an analysis of it? And he left the link. But the thing is, I really don't like reading Bhikkhu Bodhi very much. Sometimes he's actually kind of depressing. And I think I might have read this years ago because I do vaguely remember reading Bhikkhu Bodhi writing about non-duality. But it was very dry and kind of I don't think he really endorsed non-duality. I think he might have been trying to refute the idea that the Buddha was teaching non-duality, because he really is sort of the scholastic type. He doesn't meditate much, if at all. And he really likes all of the complicated philosophical system. But again, I mean, I didn't read the article that Siovach and Sipad Zidana included in the link. And I warn people in advance. I mean, people are sending me like YouTube links and like links to like essays and articles and so forth. Sometimes they'll send me entire books. And less than half the time will I actually watch the video or read the book. I mean, sometimes I just get swamped with it. And sometimes it's just stuff that I'm just not really interested in anyway. Sometimes it turns out to be really interesting, but in this case, I was not inspired to read Bhikkhu Bodhi's article. But I do think that he really doesn't get non-dualism. I just don't think that he gets it. So if you want to know about non-duality in the Buddhist teachings, you probably do well to read somebody else's take on it. And so I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Tigger, formerly known as Hey It's Tig. And Tigger says, in your opinion, how was the Kyaiktiyo Pagoda in Burma built? And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Kyaiktiyo Pagoda, it's this little pagoda that's on top of a boulder. And the boulder is just balanced on this rocky crag. And one person can even rock the boulder back and forth, but it's still stable enough that it doesn't fall off. And somebody at some point got the idea, let's build a pagoda on top of this wobbly boulder that's balanced on this crag. And so they did. And I assume the way they did it is the way they build just about any small pagoda, just using bricks and mortar. You got like the masons up there on top of the boulder. And I mean, the way I've been told, I've never been to Kyaiktiyo myself. I've seen lots of pictures of it, of course. But I've been told that the pagoda on top of the boulder actually helps to balance the boulder. I mean, it's sort of, it makes the center of gravity farther away from the whole boulder just falling off this crag that is balanced on. So, I mean, the real question is how did the boulder get balanced on top of the crag to begin with? And the Burmese traditional explanation is that it's some wizard did it. But I really can't say if a wizard did put the boulder there. And who knows, maybe the wizard had the pagoda built too, shortly after balancing the huge boulder on top of this crag. But I don't know if anyone really knows. That maybe Western scholarship could figure it out. You get like archaeologists there trying to figure it out, but I mean, they might violate some taboo by scratching the gold leaf stuck onto the boulder, or the Burmese just don't want to know what the Western opinion is because they're content with their wizard theory. I mean, that happens. So, I mean, how it was built, I mean, it was built fairly easily and straightforwardly. You just climb up onto this big boulder and build this little brick pagoda there. But how the boulder got balanced there is the real question. But that question was not asked, and I'm not going to go any farther with it than I already did. And I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Lieberlam. I assume that's how you pronounce it. I don't know how to pronounce some of these names. So Lieberlam says, what were the most interesting experiences you had as a freelance monk before you ordained? I can't remember the exact word you used in your book, but like trying to do the monk thing without a sangha. Well, I mean, I never was a freelance monk before I ordained. I considered it. I considered, when I was trying to figure out how I was going to renounce the world and live a spiritual life, I considered becoming a Zen monk. I even briefly considered becoming a Carthusian Catholic monk who takes a vow of silence and then thereby doesn't have to tell anyone that he's not really a Christian. It was a dumb idea. I mean, you at least have to make confession to a father confessor or something, I assume. I considered just making a wool robe and getting myself a wooden bowl and just hitting the road. But I knew myself well enough to know that, I mean, having a pre-established system that would help me to behave myself, all these rules and so forth, and like senior authority figures kind of helping to guide you and so forth, that would definitely be easier and more likely for me to have some kind of success than if I just do it on my own. But on the other hand, I have been a freelance monk after I ordained. Like probably at least half the time I was a monk, I was living alone out in a forest, or living like the only monk at a monastery, or just being the senior monk where I just didn't have to take orders from anybody other than just what are in the texts, like the Vinaya rules and so forth. So yeah, I have been a freelance monk. The most interesting experiences, man, I've had lots of experiences as a freelance monk, but that was after I ordained, while I actually was a monk, and just avoiding the Sangha because most Asian monks really, I mean, I've talked about this before. It's like maybe 2% are really trying to be conscientious monks living in accordance with the texts. The other 98% have got other reasons for why they became monks, various reasons, and they're just, at best just trying to make some progress and sort of making an investment for their next existence, which presumably will be better and they'll be able to practice Dhamma better, or at least they'll get into heaven with the harem of celestial nymphs or something. So I just tend to avoid monasteries. Like most monasteries in the West and in the East, literally, it's against the rules of monastic discipline even to set foot on the property because of this thing called nisagiya, where, I mean, I was talking about this, I think it was in the previous Q&A, where the rules are so strict that if you make use of anything that another monk has paid for, then you're committing an offense. And I mean, it even goes so far as I gave this example, which is in the commentaries. A monk buys a mango with his own money, eats the mango, throws the pit on the ground. That pit sprouts and grows into a tree. 100 years later, a different monk sits in the shade of that tree, and that different monk is breaking a rule because he is making use of something that a monk bought with money. And so since almost every monastery in the East and in the West has had monks like contributing to buying the property, endorsing checks and so forth, that, I mean, it's all nisagiya. And so the way to avoid that is you just avoid monasteries. You avoid other monks as a general rule. And I did that for many years. There was a famous Italian monk who lived in Burma who also, he just famously, I mean, he just went everywhere on foot. He walked all the way to India and back. He did the pilgrimage on foot to India and back to Burma again. And he just did not stay in monasteries. He just avoided monasteries, avoided monks because he was strict, and most monks aren't. And you can break rules just by interacting with monks who are unconscientious. So with regard to the most interesting experiences, I mean, it would just be sort of an arbitrary choice. I mean, I've had a lot of interesting experiences, like the time I got attacked by ogres, or the time that I made a raft out of 2 inner tubes and some bamboo and a little bit of teak planking, and went down Patolone Creek after the monsoon hit, where it was like rapids, and then came out on the Chindwin River and and that was an interesting trip. That was that was an interesting experience. Um, but it could be that my attempts to be a freelance monk were in the West. And I wouldn't know where to begin. All these weird experiences I've had, and and like probably at least half of the weird experiences I've had as a freelance monk. Um, they occurred when I was being a freelance monk. These weird experiences, like half my life as a monk was freelance, essentially just avoiding other monks and monasteries as a general rule, as much as I was able. So I guess I'm just not going to answer that question. What were the most interesting experiences? Because, just take your pick. I've had so many interesting experiences. And most of those times were when I was just a solitary monk avoiding like monasticism in general, just avoiding monasteries. So I guess I'll just move on to Libra Lamb's next question. I apologize to Libra Lamb for not giving some juicy experiences, but I really, it's just like picking them out of a hat or something. It's where do I begin? So, Libra Lamb's next question. Do you think God as a name derives power from ancient mythology, like with the ancient Canaanite mythology of El, or is more of something that gains power through living spirit, like people praying to God in the context of modern doctrine? Well, I don't know how the word God as a name derives power from ancient mythology, since in ancient times they weren't using the modern English word God. So, El is not the same word as God. So, I think the word God as a name derives power just from all the people, especially now, who believe in God, who attribute really profound significance to God, who are praying to God, who are swearing by God. It's just it's just this living belief, this living tradition, which gives the word God power. Um, and also the cultural stuff, which is, rooted in the past, has an effect also. People today wouldn't believe in God if there wasn't like a theistic tradition going back into ancient times. So, that there is some power in the past also, but like El, the Canaanite god El, he's most modern Christians are like oblivious. They're just almost totally ignorant of, Jehovah God's origins, or at least partial origins in the Canaanite king of gods, El. But there's another question about El, which is this next one. So the next question from Libra Lamb is, do you think that the development of something like the mythology of El is relevant to the spiritual life of modern day Jews, Christians, and Muslims, even though it is heretical to all three, like the Atthakavagga is to Buddhists, something that sort of sets the record straight on how they got to the metaphysical assumptions and mythology that they currently use? I don't think it's relevant to the spiritual life of modern day Jews, Christians, and Muslims to the extent that they are oblivious to it. Most modern day Jews, Christians, and Muslims really don't know the evolution of the concept of the monotheistic God. I mean, like the question above was referring to, the monotheistic God probably, for the Abrahamic religions, probably began with El. That was the God of Abraham, I guess. And he was a god to all the Canaanites, or most of them. And he was like the king of gods. He had a female consort. I don't remember the name of the goddess who was El's consort. And then around the time of Moses, presumably, El got conflated with Yahweh, who was like an Edomite or Midianite, like a war god, the god of hosts, the god of armies. And so I think El just sort of got sucked into Yahweh. I think Yahweh became like the main god of the Israelites. And then, some of the tribes at least probably spent some time in Egypt and they got some Egyptian ideas mixed in, and then, eventually there was the Babylonian captivity, which is when the Jews became monotheists, pretty much, or so it seems. I mean, before that, it was just that Yahweh or the Lord, whatever name they were going to go by, because they couldn't really call him by his real name, because that was, you can get stoned to death for saying Yahweh, I guess. Like in the Life of Brian, the guy who's going to get stoned for saying this piece of halibut is good enough for Jehovah, and he's going to get stoned to death for that. So, man, I'm just kind of wandering all over with this one. But I mean, most people, the ancient evolution and origins of their spiritual system are largely irrelevant, because all that really matters is what they're in now, how they are feeling now, what they are told now, and what they know or think they know now. And so ancient stuff with regard to, how Abrahamic monotheism arose, or, how early Buddhism arose, for that matter. I mean, for me, it was important to know, just because if I was going to be a Buddhist, I wanted to know and try to follow what the historical Buddha, the original enlightened founder of the system, taught. And so you have to do some detective work to get closer to understanding what he originally taught. For Abrahamic monotheists, it's not nearly so important, because there was no real, well, I guess there was, the Christians they had their founder in Jesus of Nazareth, although he was a reformer, pretty much, of a pre-existing tradition. Muhammad is a little more complicated with regard to that. But, understanding the origin of Allah, because, there was the pagan Arabs. They were worshiping Allah too. It's just he was sort of like Jehovah, or Yahweh started out as just sort of like the patron god of this tribe. But you don't have to know that stuff. In fact, I think to a faith-based religionist, that actually knowing the nuts and bolts of how your religion arose would probably be damaging to their faith. They've got this idealized faith, that it's all just divinely inspired and so forth. So ignorance would be bliss to that extent, I guess. So I'm gonna make sure I'm actually answering the question here instead of just rambling. Do you think that the development of something like the mythology of El is relevant to the spiritual life of modern day Jews, Christians, and Muslims, even though it's heretical to all three? Well, only to those who really take an interest in that and bother to learn about it. And they're going to be more philosophically oriented and less faith oriented. And they're probably going to be relatively lukewarm as a consequence anyway. So, yeah, I think that it probably, it's just not an issue for most religious people in the West, because they're just oblivious to it for the most part. So I'll just move on to the next question, which is from Harim Cthulhu. And Harim Cthulhu says, do you prefer to live among white people? Which is actually kind of an interesting question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. And there's nuance to it. It's not just a plain yes or no question. I think to the extent that I do prefer to live among white people, it's because I can communicate with white people, because I'm white and I was born and raised in a predominantly white culture. So that when I was living in Burma, for example, I lived in Burma for more than 20 years, I can appreciate that Burmese people in certain respects are superior to the average Western person. They've got a certain depth to them, and they've got more Dhamma in their lives, and they just have certain virtues come naturally to them. They're very modest, virtuous people as a general rule. There are always going to be exceptions, including, especially in the government. But there's always this culture barrier, that even if you know the words of their language and the grammar and everything, still there's this barrier in between really communicating, because you just don't think like a Burmese person does. And so there's always this separation in other cultures that, I mean, there's going to be separation anywhere, but it's less separation living in America among fellow Native Americans than there is living in a foreign culture that you're just sort of transplanted into. So that would be the main thing. It's not any kind of racial issue so much as it's a cultural issue, and that I was just raised in a more or less European culture, and I can communicate with more or less European people more deeply. I can just resonate with them. We can be on the same page easier than living in a foreign culture that is just very foreign. Like Burmese people, it's like they'll ask me a question, how long has it been? And I have no idea what they're referring to. But the Burmese, it's just they understand each other. So that the Burmese language is really kind of almost like abbreviated, because like half of each sentence that you say in Burmese is just inferred, and the other person, because they're Burmese too, they're thinking along the same lines as you. So you just have to just give these little signs to kind of steer their understanding of what you're saying, and they're able to communicate because it's just so traditional, and the way they think is so similar that just giving little hints as to what you mean, and they just follow the hints, and it works for them. But for a Western person, someone asks me, how long has it been? I'll say, how long has what been? And then they'll say, yes. And I'll say again, like, how long has what been? And they say, yes, sir. And it's like, how do you communicate like that? It's also, especially when I first got to Burma, I didn't realize that there's really no word for hello or goodbye in Burmese. So, I mean, there's like Mingalaba, which is like this very formal way of saying hello to, in a formal way. But most people don't say it, at least not when they're just meeting somebody on the street or whatever. So that you say hello by asking a stupid question. Or, you meet on the street, it's like, where are you going? Or if it's around lunchtime, have you eaten lunch yet? And just something like this. And it used to really bug me. It's like sometimes it was just this really obvious question. I'd be walking back from the village with my alms bowl, and some monk would say, you coming back from alms round? And it's like, oh, what impression do you get? Look at, I got my full bowl. I'm walking back to the monastery. And they would get embarrassed, because, I mean, that's just how they say hello. But it's this cultural thing in between that just prevented us from really syncing, like SYNCH, not SINK. And so, yeah, I mean, I prefer to live among white people, mainly to the extent that I'm able to communicate better and just sort of interact more fully with people who have been raised in the same kind of culture as me, have a lot of the same assumptions, or just sort of, what's the word, associations as me, so that we think more similarly. And so you can have a more satisfying conversation or interpersonal interaction. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Tzinch. And I apologize to Tzinch because his name reminds me of Dr. Seuss so much. Like the Sneetches, everyone knows you can't teach a Tzinch. So I do apologize for that. It's just, this name reminds me of Dr. Seuss, but it could be like, Bob or something in some European culture. But anyways, Tzinch says, greetings, Paññobhāsa. Have you ever been interested in Islamic philosophy? People like Ibn Sina, al-Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, Ibn Khaldun, etc. Some of these were responsible for bringing Aristotle and some other Greeks to the West during the Reconquista. A lot of stuff was being translated from Arabic, and people like Aquinas owed their interest in Aristotle to people like Ibn Rushd, who wrote an extensive amount of commentaries, some of which are now only available in Latin and extinct in Arabic. Well, I've never been particularly interested in Islamic philosophy. I've read a few biographies of Muhammad, including, what's her name, Karen Armstrong's biography of Muhammad. I've read an English translation of the Quran. I wanted to read like the Penguin version like an old Penguin translation that had it in chronological order, like the order that scholars assume Muhammad actually produced these surahs. But by the time I ordered the Penguin edition of the Quran, they had gone back to just the traditional ordering so as not to offend anybody, I guess. So I've read a little bit about uh, Islam, but I mean, I'm not particularly interested in it. So yeah. So I mean, I've read the Quran, I've read biographies of Muhammad, I've read some stuff about the early years of Islam and so forth, but I've never really had any great interest in it. Even Sufism, I think he mentioned Sufism a little later, but in a different question. But Sufism was partly inspired by Buddhism, and even so, I still not particularly interested in Sufism. It just seems like it's got too much baggage or too much sort of deadwood in a way, stuff that really sort of gets in the way of spirituality. I assume there have been some very profoundly wise Muslim philosophers, but I don't know. I just have never really resonated with that or been much interested in that. And most of Islam does not strike me as particularly wise. So I guess I'll just move on to Zinch's next question here. Do you personally find Aristotle or Plato more insightful and meaningful? Even though Sufi thought is Neoplatonist, a lot of Arabic thinkers have preferred Aristotle and even went as far as to almost disregard Plato, labeling him as merely belled letters. I don't know how to pronounce that word. I would have written more, but I understand this message is already huge as is. Have a nice day, Paññobhāsa, and anyone listening. Well, thank you, Tzinch. And I do apologize for the fact that your name reminds me of Dr. Seuss. But the question here, do I personally find Aristotle or Plato more insightful and meaningful? Really, neither. I have never been impressed by either Plato or Aristotle. There's a saying that everyone, whether they realize it or not, is a disciple of Plato or Aristotle. But really, I have little use, if any use, for either. Like Plato, I got no use for the idea of universals. Plato had this idea that like a dog has this inherent dogness, and up in Plato's heaven, there's like the ideal dog that, all dogs partake of this essence of pure, perfect dogness up in heaven. And I mean, that's just, I just cannot buy that. But Aristotle, I mean, I think Aristotle, he made a more important contribution to Western culture than Plato did. Plato, to some degree, I mean, he helped bring about Christianity since early Christianity was profoundly influenced by Platonism. And some of the earliest Christian mystics, for example, were Neoplatonists who converted to Christianity, like the Pseudo-Dionysius, who probably had little choice but to convert to Christianity because back in those days, if you didn't convert to Christianity, you were pretty much a criminal. So let's see. Sufi thought is Neoplatonist. Yeah, it was strongly influenced by Buddhism and to some degree Hinduism also. But I'm not exactly sure of the history, like the early history of Sufism, exactly where it arose. But there are definitely some Buddhistic elements in it. But yeah, I mean, if I had to pick one or the other, that'd be a tough choice. I mean, Aristotle, I mean, at least he came up with logic. He had some profound like political thought. I mean, Plato's Republic, I mean, that's just fascism. But Aristotle, yeah, I mean, I think Aristotle may have been more useful as a philosopher. I'm not exactly sure what Plato contributed other than just messing up subsequent philosophers. Like Schopenhauer, I think the weakest aspect of Schopenhauer's philosophy is what he gets from Plato. Like Schopenhauer believed in universals, for example. So yeah, I mean, Aristotle just completely bungled stuff like astronomy. He just didn't understand astronomy or much of physics at all. I mean, he tried, but he just didn't get it. But in a way, he sort of set the groundwork for subsequent, like, scientific endeavors and so forth. And yeah, I mean, Plato gave rise to Neoplatonism. I mean, indirectly. I really not so sure that Plato himself was as profound a thinker as someone like Plotinus, but at least he indirectly um, led to like a profound mystical like tradition in Western culture up until the intolerant hysteria of early Christianity just drove it into extinction. Well, after like cannibalizing parts of it. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I really don't particularly like Aristotle or Plato, but I think I would find more of use in Aristotle, like his discussion of, like politics, for example, and just his coming up with formal logic. I mean, that was very valuable. So I think Aristotle would take the prize of most important with regard to benefit to Western society just from coming up with formal logic. But Plato definitely has had a. It's hard to say who has had a stronger influence on the West just because of Plato's profound influence on early Christianity and just the New Testament. So, and even like a lot of Jewish thought. I mean, the early Christians were Jews who were or Platonists of some sort, Platonized Jews. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question here. And this is from the Arya Swasti Project. And the Arya Swasti Project says, if someone claims to be enlightened, how can that be verified by others unless they are enlightened too? Also, is conventional truth necessary to consider on the path to enlightenment? And if not, why is it not important? So this is a second question. I got to separate these questions. All right, first question. If someone claims to be enlightened, how can that be verified by others unless they are enlightened too? I mean, you can't verify. You can't know for sure. And like I was saying, I've said it many times, full enlightenment may not even really mean anything valid in a samsaric context. That within a samsaric context, there are no enlightened beings. And it may be that whether somebody else is enlightened depends on how enlightened you are. That within your own, like your own view, they're not going to be any wiser than you are necessarily because you can't imagine anything wiser than you, in a sense. I mean, you can think someone's wiser than you. They can behave much more calmly and they may seem to make wrong choices less than you. They may be happier than you, but still, you can't really understand what's going on in the mind of someone who is wiser than you or more advanced than you are because you're limited by your own limitations of advancement. And it's like Huineng says in the Platform Sutra of Huineng, I mean, when you become enlightened, you look around, you realize that everyone else is enlightened too. Whereas if you're a fool, you look around, you're just going to see fools. So there is that. But with regard to how can you at least hope to get some handle on, like someone's claiming to be enlightened, I mean, how can you do something at least to like verify that to some degree? I mean, there are ways, especially like I'm reminded of something that St. Francis of Assisi said, and that is you don't really know somebody until you see them when everything goes wrong. When people that are supposed to be on their side suddenly turn against them, what do? And if they like, they seem to be calm and like well balanced and everything when everything is going good. But then if something bad happens, they just freak out or go into a rage or something. Then they still got issues. They're not really all that wise yet. Because even the most vicious dog in the world, it can seem completely calm when it's just lying on the grass licking its balls or whatever. It can just seem completely calm. But really, it's got its vicious streak. It's got its vicious anusias, its underlying tendencies. And so, I mean, like a con man can appear to be really wise. I assume a lot of cult leaders pass themselves off as enlightened beings when really they're just rascals who are good at passing themselves off as enlightened beings. I think one danger sign is people who brag about how enlightened they are. I could name a few names, but those of you who watch these videos probably could name a few names also, just people who just brag about how enlightened they are. That's one reason why I am skeptical of the suttas in which the Buddha is bragging about how enlightened he is, because I just do not think that an enlightened being is going to be boastful, that he's going to be like a narcissist or an egomaniac and just brag. So, I mean, there is that. But really, I think what St. Francis of Assisi said is you don't really know somebody until you see them when the shit is hitting the fan, when everything's going wrong, when everything that's supposed to be going right suddenly just goes south, you know, that then you get a better idea as to how really wise another person is. But for the most part, you can't be sure. You can't really know how wise another person is. You can get some, you can kind of hypothesize, you can make educated guesses, but it's really hard to say. So I guess I'll just move on to the second part of the Arya Swasti Project's question here. Also, is conventional truth necessary to consider on the path to enlightenment? And if not, why it not important? Yeah, I mean, it's like, just because a person knows ultimate reality doesn't mean that they're going to know all the, like quantum theory and how to speak Han Chinese and how many hairs that everybody has on their head. They're not going to be omniscient in a samsaric sense. They're still going to be human beings in the samsaric sense. So, conventional truth, I mean, one of the most important things to like logic and rational thought is as a bullshit detector. You're never going to arrive at ultimate truth through logic or rationality, but you can shoot down a lot of just bullshit, absurd theories. At least it can help you to weed out the bullshit. And that's really about the best thing that it's good for, other than just navigating samsara. I mean, you've got tax forms to fill out. You've got something that you've got to assemble following instructions. Then it helps to have some rational thinking. But with regard to enlightenment, the best use of just worldly knowledge is skepticism and just being able to detect faulty arguments and just bullshit arguments. So, let's see. I want to make sure that I answer this question more or less adequately. Is conventional truth necessary to consider on the path to enlightenment? Certain conventional truths are necessary, especially at first, just like right view, which is, if you do good, good's going to come back. If you do bad, bad's going to come back. What goes around comes around. There is karma. There is a certain basis to morality. There's a certain basics like that are going to be skillful means that are going to help, like, point you and move you in the right direction. It's the raft made of rubbish. And then once you cross the flood, you don't need that raft anymore, and you can just cut it loose. But a certain amount of conventional truth is necessary just to help guide you on the path to enlightenment, even though ultimately it's a raft made of rubbish that you're not going to need after you become enlightened, unless you still got tax forms to fill out or something. So I hope that answered the question. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which is from the Anti-Marxist League. And the Anti-Marxist League says, on the subject of eclecticism, wouldn't it be better to keep things as bare bones as possible? The more one adds to their eclectic views, the more views one has. This approach seems like the opposite of the teaching in the Atthakavagga. The same, of course, could be said for adopting every aspect of a single tradition. I'm not condemning either approach, but it seems like one should keep such things to a minimum. And yeah, I mean, eclecticism can be good or bad, just being single-mindedly dedicated to one tradition and not having any interest in other traditions, that also can be good or bad. One of the advantages of eclecticism is that, you become bahusutta, and even the Buddha in the text says you should be familiar with other points of view. You should be familiar with a broad spectrum of attitudes and points of view, just so, somebody who's born and raised into a tradition and they don't want to know anything about other traditions, that's all wrong view. You know, it's like a Jehovah's Witness who are always trying to hand out, you know, like pamphlets or literature of their own system, but you try to hand them like a Buddhist pamphlet, and here, take a look at this. They'll just recoil as though you're trying to hand them a snake. And that helps to guarantee that they're going to be locked into this very limited point of view. So to that extent, eclecticism is definitely to one's advantage. But still, what the Anti-Marxist League says is true, that, I mean, you don't want your mind just cluttered up with all this information when really all this worldly information is not, it's not the same as enlightenment. And if you want to understand ultimate truth, you can go along with what St. John of the Cross says, which is, in order to know all things, seek to know nothing. Which is, I mean, you're not going to understand ultimate reality by thinking about it. So the eclecticism, again, can be used as a kind of bullshit detector, and just, it can help you to triangulate. Like, you've got a number of wisdom traditions. Like, you take the wisest spiritual systems in existence, and what do they have in common? I mean, that would be kind of a good hypothesis, at least kind of make it more likely that those aspects are more true. And I'm going to close the door because my sweetheart just came home. I like rolling in chairs. So, where was I? Yeah. Yeah, and most people just cannot follow the Atthakavagga. I mean, the Atthakavagga says, have no view, have no perceptions, have no beliefs. And that's very advanced. That's, I mean, only a fully enlightened being can probably fully manage that. So, yeah, I mean, it is good not to just filling your mind up with all this information that you take seriously and consider to be true. And that unless you have the wisdom to know that it's just provisionally true. Gosh. But yeah, I mean, eclecticism has its advantage, especially for Western people. I mean, most Western people that are spiritually inclined or philosophically inclined, they're just not narrow-minded enough to just adopt one system and just like be dedicated only to that system and just ignore or reject everything else. That works for people in pre-modern societies. It works for people in like Buddhist Burma, for example. But for a Westerner like me, it just wouldn't work. I mean, I want to know what all traditions say, and so at least I'll know what I'm rejecting. You know, even if you're not a Christian, it's useful to read the Bible just so that you'll know what it is that you're rejecting by not being a Christian. So it's like why I read the Quran, for example. So, yeah, it can go both ways. I mean, it depends on whether you manage it skillfully or not. You know, it's not just the outward action that determines whether an action is skillful or unskillful. It's the accompanying mental states. And two people can do exactly the same thing. One's got wholesome mental states, the other one's got unwholesome mental states. So, yeah, it's just whatever works best for you, whatever is most successful in causing you to be detached and serene and like clear-minded. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Tim the Enchanter. And Tim the Enchanter says, let's say there is no such thing as enlightenment. What would you guess those experiences were then? Of the Buddha and the like, delusion, hallucinations, brain malfunction from chronic sleep and food deprivation? The question is just hypothetical. Well, if there's no such thing as enlightenment, then somebody like Gautama Buddha, his experiences were as close as you're going to get to enlightenment, which is probably not what Tim the Enchanter was thinking, but I think that's essentially it. It's like, even if there is no perfection in this imperfect world, that still some people are closer to the ideal of perfection than others, and the ones that are considered to be enlightened are the people who are closest to that. Or, yeah, I guess there wouldn't be an or because there is no enlightenment. So that would be my answer to that, because I really find it difficult to believe that. I mean, there's no such thing as wisdom or like insight. Yeah, I mean, there obviously is, and so you just say, well, I mean, people that are considered to be enlightened or declared to be enlightened are people who have gotten farther along the route towards perfection, even though perfection may not be attainable in this life. Like Christianity, most Christians will say, or at least most knowledgeable Christians will say, that you cannot become perfect in this world. You cannot become totally perfect ever, because the highest thing you can hope for is the beatific vision. You never merge with God. You just are able to get close to God, maybe see God in heaven. And that's it. So, but still, just because they say you can't attain perfection, it doesn't mean that, everybody's just hopeless. There some people are better off than others. So I don't know if I answered that one. So I'm just gonna answer Tim the Enchanter's next question, or at least attempt. Oh, this is a fairly easy one, so I'll answer this one for sure. And his question is, have you ever had muscle spasms from the lack of magnesium and potassium, living largely on rice in Burma, and doing walking meditation and sweating a lot? No, the only time I ever got cramps, I never had muscle spasms where it's like, other than cramps. I mean, there have been times when I was meditating when I'd be like jerking and twitching, but that would be like PT, which is something entirely different from what he's talking about here. But the only time I ever had cramps, partly sometimes you just sit wrong, you get like a leg cramp or something, but mostly it would be if I went up into the hills during the cold season, and just the cold weather would cause me to get leg cramps. But I never really had um, like cramps or muscle spasms from lack of electrolytes until I came to here to South Carolina and started working in like 90-degree warehouses. And then I would get weird cramps and stuff sometimes. I still do. Just, I mean, not now because the weather's cooling down, but when the weather is hot, I think there might be electrolyte loss involved in just getting weird cramps, like during hot weather. So I guess I answered that question. So I'll just move on to Tim the Enchanter's next question, which is, what would you say evil is? Who would the true evil person be, assuming we do not have a lot of free will? Well, I like Schopenhauer's take on evil, where Schopenhauer was saying that like a completely ruthless, cutthroat kind of person, like some business executive who's willing to just walk over the backs of anyone who gets in his way, that he is not really evil. I mean, he's ruthless and selfish and foolish, but he's not flat out evil. Now, according to Schopenhauer, evil comes from enjoying other people's suffering, that you enjoy hurting others. So somebody like Tiberius Caesar or Chairman Mao, who allegedly enjoyed watching people getting tortured to death, that would be evil, especially if they're the ones who ordered the person to be tortured in the first place. So, yeah, someone who enjoys hurting others, who like derives pleasure, for some perverted kind of inferior pleasure from the suffering of others. I think that would be what evil would be. Just taking people as far away from happiness as they can and just enjoying that. So, yeah. So I'll just move on to the next question here. And this person has the interesting name of Mohinga, which is a kind of Burmese noodle soup. It's really good. I kind of almost miss Mohinga. So I assume this person is either Burmese or they've spent time in Burma, or at least been exposed to Burmese culture in order to know what Mohinga is. But if you ever go to Burma, try the Mohinga. It's good. Anyways, Mohinga says, long videos covering many subjects would really appreciate timestamps. Any of your subscribers willing to make them? Sometimes people on YouTube make timestamps, but Mohinga was watching me on BitChute, and thus far, I don't have enough viewers on BitChute for any of them to be inspired to do timestamps. So sometimes on the YouTube videos, somebody will come in and do timestamps, but not every time. So I guess the best you can do is you just go through the questions. I always have the questions include section below the video, and you can just sort of estimate how far through the video the question is. And unless you want to make timestamps, if Mohinga wants to make timestamps, that's fine too. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Don or Don, like the Spanish Don. I'm not sure which. And this also is the very last question. So this is the last question of the show. And Don or Don says, Dear Paññobhāsa, how does one square the circle of the teaching of no soul and the hundreds or thousands of near-death experience testimonies that say, I found myself floating above my body, but it was still me. And then they go on in spirit to have various heavenly or hellish experiences, and also including the whole concept of astral projection. Does this not refute the concept of anatta? What are your thoughts? Well, anatta is not really no soul. It is no self at all. So according to the doctrine of anatta, I don't exist even now. It's not just saying, uh-oh, the battery's running dead. Just a second. I forgot to plug the computer in again. I do that so many times. Just a second here. All right. Okay. So, I mean, anatta doesn't literally mean no soul. It means no self. So even I as a person, regardless of whether I have an eternal soul, I don't exist in reality. I don't have an inherent self-essence. And if you can believe that you exist as an individual, like in the meat puppet or whatever, then I mean the being that's floating above, the accident victim or the near drowning victim or whatever, and is going up towards the light and meeting the spirit guide in this heaven realm. I mean, you can be just as deluded with regard to that. So just because you do astral traveling, that is not proof that you have a self, because even you sitting there in your own body doesn't prove that you have a self, that you have an individual mind, or at least you think you have an individual mind. You still don't have a self. I mean, you do not have a distinct, ultimately real individuality. That ultimately, that difference is papancha. It's just a kind of delusion, separating the world up into this and that. It's all part of delusion, essentially. So it's like you've got this infinite possibilities in samsara, let's say, infinite possibilities, and some of those possibilities are just like an aspect of consciousness becomes so convoluted and reflexive that it starts thinking that it's separate from everything else. But it's not. And that's where the delusion of self comes from. And the delusion of soul, that you've got an individual eternal soul, is just like it's like a projection from the idea that you're having a distinct individual existence now, even just in a meat body. But you don't. I mean, at least not according to Buddhist philosophy. Although there are some Buddhists, especially Western ones, who just vehemently, sometimes angrily insist that they have an eternal soul. But I mean, I think they're just missing the whole idea. The whole idea is that there is no ultimately real self-essence to anything. That everything is just conditional. That you're as much a product of the surrounding context as anything else. It's like your essence is no different from the essence of anything else, really. So that's what anatta is about. And like near-death experiences and astral traveling and so forth, doesn't change that any more than everybody apparently having their own distinct individual meat and body and their own mind that is oblivious to the minds of others around them. It's apparently closed off, self-contained, and individually distinct, but ultimately that is all illusion. So I hope I answered that. And that's it. I'm done. I'm done answering for this evening or whatever time of day you happen to watch this. And if you have any questions, you're very welcome to ask them. I cannot absolutely guarantee that I'll be able to answer them. And if you send me links to articles or YouTube videos or some such, I do not absolutely guarantee that I'll take the trouble of watching them because I get so many anyway, and other reasons, I guess. But if you have questions about Buddhism, philosophy, meditation, monasticism, me personally, whatever, feel free to include them in the comments below and check out the URL links. I think my archaic nipapancha.org website is now defunct, but it's going to be improved and renewed eventually, preferably, probably within the next few months. And be happy.